Only I showed up at my husband's funeral. Not our son, not our daughter, not a single grandchild, just me standing next to his casket while the freezing wind blew through the chapel yard like even the sky couldn't stand to stay. The funeral man looked nervous, eyes moving between the empty chairs and my face. He coughed once, then twice. "Would you like us to wait a little longer, Mrs. Holloway?" "No," I said, "start now." Before we continue, please kindly take a second to like this video. Write us in the comments where you are watching from. And lastly, click on the notification so you don't miss out. George would have hated waiting. He was always on time, even in his last weeks, taking his medicine by the clock, watching the 6 o'clock news every night, putting his slippers side by side before sleeping. A man who liked routine, a man who cared about respect, and now a man being buried alone. I sat in the front row, all 5 chairs around me, completely empty. The preacher read from the Bible without any feeling. The flowers were too colorful, the casket too shiny. I couldn't stop thinking how George would have laughed at all this fuss, and then looked around, confused, asking where on earth the kids were. Where were they? A text had come that morning. Our son Peter sent one line. "Sorry, Mom. Something came up. Can't make it. No reason why. No phone call." I pictured him at his office, or probably on a golf course with clients, pretending not to feel the weight of today, pretending his father dying was just a small thing on a busy schedule. Our daughter, Celia, hadn't texted at all. She'd left a voicemail 2 days before, light as air. "Mom, I really can't cancel my nail appointment, and you know how nervous I get with rescheduling. Tell Dad I'll visit next week." Next week? Like, dead people can wait. After the service, I walked alone behind the men carrying the casket. I didn't cry. Not because I wasn't sad. I'd been sad for months, but because there's a type of sadness so heavy, it just sits inside you like a rock. And that day, I was already buried under it. The cemetery was almost empty. One old worker watched from far away, hand resting on his shovel. The casket went down. The prayers were whispered. Dirt hit wood. Quiet met quiet. I stood there a while, after everyone else left. My heels sank a little into the dirt, and I felt the wind grab my coat. The headstone would come later, for now just a simple marker with George's name. George Holloway, beloved husband, father, forgotten. The words stuck in my head like a rock in my shoe. Forgotten. Back home, the quiet was deafening. His chair sat untouched, his slippers side by side, the TV remote right where he'd left it. I stared at it for a long time. Then I walked to the kitchen, opened a bottle of wine, a good one from the cabinet I always saved for guests, and poured myself a glass. I took out my phone and opened Instagram. I don't scroll often, but something told me to look. Celia's page was public, of course. She'd posted 2 hours ago a picture of her with 3 girlfriends, drinks in hand, midday meal. Caption, "Girls' brunch, bottomless mimosas, living our best lives." Peter had posted too. A photo of the 9th hole, his new golf club shining in the sun. Great swing, perfect weather, deals closed. I stared at the screen until it got blurry. Then I turned off the phone, took another sip of wine, and stared at the picture on the wall. George and me on our 40th anniversary, standing by the rose bushes he'd planted with his own hands. They used to bloom bright red. Now they were bare. Tomorrow, I thought, I'll call the lawyer. I'll make changes quietly, with the same respect George lived with. Because if I was the only one to show up for his last goodbye, I would be the only one to carry out his final wishes and theirs. That evening, I sat alone in our kitchen, the same room where George used to peel apples with perfect precision, cutting them into neat little crescents and lining them up on a plate. He'd always give me the best piece, the one with the most sun, he called it. Now the fruit bowl sat untouched, a couple of old pears sagging under their own weight. The silence wasn't new. George had been gone for almost 2 weeks before the funeral, and those days had already started teaching me what alone felt like. But tonight it pressed harder, louder, meaner. I couldn't stop thinking about the empty chairs, about Celia's message, or really, the lack of one. I had raised a daughter who could watch her father be lowered into the ground from the comfort of a brunch table. Had I failed her? Or had she failed something inside herself that couldn't be fixed anymore? Peter's text was still there. No punctuation, no warmth, just a flat rejection in black and white. Something came up. Was it shame? Not caring? Or the kind of casual cruelty you don't even notice until it's too late? I poured another glass of wine, not out of sadness, out of clarity. I walked down the hall to our bedroom, opened the top drawer of George's desk. His things were still organized the same way. Envelopes, extra keys, an old stamp collection. I reached behind the files and pulled out the folder I kept hidden behind everything else. Thin, neat, held together with a rubber band. It was labeled Estate. Inside were copies of our will, a list of who gets what, our instructions for what should happen to the house, the car, the bank accounts, even the antique clock George's grandfather had brought from Ireland. Everything had been prepared, reviewed by our lawyer 2 years ago with love and careful thought. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened the file. Peter was listed as co-beneficiary of the main investment account, the one with almost $300,000 saved over a lifetime of hard work and careful spending. He and Celia were both included in the house transfer section. Even the lake cabin, the one they never visited anymore but always asked about when taxes were due, was marked for them. I held the pages in my hand, my fingers shaking. Not from age, from something deeper. Betrayal has a heartbeat, and mine was pounding in my ears. I got up and walked to the closet, pulling out a canvas storage box. Inside were all the old photos. Family gatherings, birthdays, holidays. George holding the kids when they were small. Me on the porch laughing, Celia tugging at my sleeve. Peter asleep in George's lap with a book fallen open across his chest. We were once a family. And maybe I'd been too blind to see how far that family had drifted. Maybe love doesn't break in a storm. Maybe it fades like wallpaper in the sun, quietly, until one day you don't recognize the pattern anymore. I picked up a photo of George and Peter fishing. Peter must have been 12. George had his arm around him, pointing at something in the water, his smile full and soft. That man had deserved more than an empty chapel. I put the photo down. Then I picked up the phone. It was almost midnight, but I didn't care. I called Thomas Fields, our lawyer. It went to voicemail, as expected. I left a message anyway. Thomas, it's May Holloway. I need to change my will urgently. Call me in the morning. I ended the call and stood for a long moment by the window. The moonlight touched the top of the rose bushes outside. They'd withered since George passed, not from neglect, but like they were grieving too. I knew I should trim them, give them room to grow again. But not tonight. Tonight I let the old petals fall. Tomorrow I would start cutting out what didn't belong anymore. The lawyer's office smelled like old books and polish, the kind of place where time felt thick and silence had a certain weight. Thomas Fields had known George and me for over 30 years. He handled our first mortgage, George's business papers, the deed to the lake house, and eventually our estate plan, trustworthy, careful, and like me, a little tired of people who smiled when they wanted something. He looked up from his desk as I walked in, standing from his chair with a look of mild surprise. "May," he said, buttoning his jacket. "You're here early." "It couldn't wait," I answered, settling into the leather chair across from him. My coat still smelled faintly of the garden. I'd cut the dead roses that morning, early before breakfast. Pruning always calmed me. There was something honest about cutting back what no longer served a purpose. "I got your message," Thomas said, sitting down. "You said you want to change your will?" "Yes," I said. "Peter and Celia are to be removed completely." He paused, not out of shock, but out of care. "Are you sure?" I looked him in the eye. I buried my husband alone. Our children didn't come. Not a call, not a flower. They were busy. I placed my hands calmly on the table. They don't deserve a dime. Thomas gave a slow nod. Then we'll write a full amendment. You want to remove them from every part? Yes. The accounts, the house, the cabin, everything. Understood. He opened a legal pad and started writing in neat lines. Do you want to give the money to someone else? I thought of Ethan, my grandson, Celia's boy, the only one who ever visited, without needing something. Who mowed my lawn in July not because he was asked, but because he said I shouldn't be sweating out there? Who brought me library books and asked my opinion on them? Who once said, Grandma, I like talking to you more than to kids my age? I took a breath. Yes, I said, I'd like to set up a trust for Ethan. I want him to have the house, the cabin, and the rest of the estate. I want it structured, carefully, protected from his parents' reach. That can be done, Thomas said with the kind of dry professionalism I appreciated. We'll create an irrevocable trust in Ethan's name. He won't have full access until he's 30, unless for school or medical costs. Does that sound good? It sounds perfect. We spent the next hour going over details, paper after paper, clause after clause. I didn't flinch. When you've buried your husband with your own hands and stood by an open grave without a child in sight, a stack of legal papers doesn't scare you. Nothing small can touch you after that. As we got near the end, Thomas looked up from his desk again. May I have to say, this isn't something many people your age do so cleanly. Most want to forgive, to keep the peace. I've kept the peace for 80 years, I said quietly. And it buried me long before it buried George. He didn't ask any more questions. By the time I left the office, the sun was just starting to stretch across the sidewalk. I stood outside a moment, letting the October air hit my face. I wasn't sad. I wasn't angry anymore either. I was simply done waiting for my children to be people they never intended to become. Done mistaking duty for love. Done writing checks with my heart and expecting anything back but silence. My footsteps echoed as I walked back to my car. The leather seat felt warmer than usual. I sat there for a moment, hands on the wheel, watching people walk by on the street. A woman passed with her daughter, holding hands, sharing a laugh. I didn't envy them. I just noticed the scene like an old song I used to like but don't play anymore. That night, I slept without the TV on, without a book, without George's old sweater folded next to me like it had been since the hospital. The silence was still there, but it didn't hurt. Not anymore. The filing cabinet in the hallway had 3 drawers, all labeled in George's neat handwriting: house, taxes, family. The last one was mine. I opened it slowly, the metal groaning a bit, like it didn't want to give up its secrets. Inside, folders upon folders, receipts, copies of checks, letters from banks, old Christmas cards tucked between loan papers. I'd kept everything, not out of obsession, but because I believed in clarity. Paper doesn't lie, and that drawer had enough truth to start a wildfire. I sat down at the kitchen table, set the folder labeled Peter, Education, and Business to one side, and opened Celia, Home, and Lifestyle. The handwriting was mine. Neater years ago, still readable now. I started reading. A $15,000 check dated 2003, Celia's wedding. It's a small ceremony, Mom. We just want a nice place. That place had chandeliers and lobster rolls and a string quartet, a $7,800 transfer, 2007. The roof's leaking, Mom. The baby's crib got soaked. I paid it within an hour, $12,000 in 2011. New braces for Ethan. $5,000 in 2013. He wants to go to summer robotics camp. It's a big deal, Mom. A year later, when Celia called crying because her husband had been laid off, I sent another $20,000. No questions asked. You always save us, she whispered on the phone. We don't know what we'd do without you. I believed her. Peter's folder was thicker. $25,000 seed money for a sure thing startup that failed in under 6 months. George warned me not to send it. I sent it anyway. A used car, a down payment, 3 semesters of grad school. I paid for hospital bills when his second daughter was born, and insurance when the first broke her arm. When Peter fell behind on taxes, I wrote a check and told no one. Looking at it all now, line after line, I wondered when exactly I'd turned into their safety net. Or maybe it had always been that way, and I was just too willing to be wrapped around their falls. Not once did they ever refuse my help, but they'd refuse to come say goodbye to their father, and that was not something paper could fix. I put the files back into the cabinet, except one. I kept the envelope marked Ethan. Inside was a note he'd written when he was 11. Messy pencil, folded in half. Grandma May, thank you for teaching me to make pancakes. I think you are very wise and funny. One day I will take care of you like you take care of me. I held the paper for a long time. He was 19 now. I didn't know if he remembered writing that letter, or if it still meant anything to him, but I did. I'd meant to be fair, to divide things equally. That's what people say, don't they? Be fair. Don't play favorites. But what if fairness wasn't sameness? What if fairness meant giving your legacy to the one person who saw you not as a bank, but as a human being? George used to say, legacy is not what you leave, it's who you leave it to. I used to think he meant money. Now I know he didn't. The house felt smaller that day, not because it had changed, but because I'd started seeing it without the clutter of memory. For years, I kept every trinket the kids ever gave me. Handmade cards, macaroni picture frames, glittery mugs. But love isn't in objects, it's in actions. And lately, their actions had all said the same thing. You are useful, not valuable. That afternoon, I packed up 3 cardboard boxes with the kids' old gifts. Not to throw away. Not yet. Just to make space. Space for something else to grow. That night, I didn't drink wine. I didn't need courage anymore. I made tea, real tea, the kind George liked. Loose leaves in a proper pot, steeped just right. I carried it to the living room and sat in the quiet, legs tucked under me. The smell of bergamot soft in the air, and for the first time in a long while, I felt the beginning of peace. The call came just after lunch, a voice I hadn't heard in months, soft, almost careful. Grandma? Ethan. I closed the ledger in front of me. I'd been looking over the utility bills, getting ready to shut off some services at the lake cabin. The one Peter never used but always called an asset. It wasn't an asset anymore, not to him. Hello, sweetheart, I said, careful to keep my voice steady. Everything okay? A pause. Then I heard about Grandpa. I'm sorry I didn't call sooner. I waited not because I wanted to punish him, but because I needed to hear if the next words were real. I didn't know he died until 2 days ago, Ethan said quickly. Mom never told me. She said he was sick, but not that he was gone. I sat very still. He died almost 3 weeks ago, Ethan. I know, he whispered. I'm sorry. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I heard something in his silence. Not guilt exactly, but grief. The real kind. The kind you can't fake. I wanted to come see you, he added. If that's okay. I exhaled. Of course it's okay. He arrived an hour later, taller than I remembered, a little scruffy, smelling faintly of clean laundry and stress. He hugged me the way young people do when they're not sure if they're still welcome, one arm slightly unsure, then all in once they realize you won't pull away. I didn't pull away. We sat in the living room. I poured him lemonade and he looked around like the house was both familiar and different. That's how grief feels, I suppose. You recognize everything, but it doesn't belong to the same world anymore. I missed his funeral, he said, and I'll never forgive myself for that. You weren't the one who chose to miss it, I said gently. He looked at me, then really looked. Did Mom really not come? I nodded once. He didn't say anything, just stared down at the coaster under his glass, running his thumb along its worn edge. She told me they had work, he said after a while, that it was handled. I should have known better. You know now. I want to do something, he said, sitting up straighter. For him? For you? Anything. You're doing it, I said. You're here. He looked unconvinced. I hesitated, then got up and came back with a manila envelope. Inside were the trust papers, unsigned, not filed yet, but real. I hadn't taken them to the bank yet. I wanted to see Ethan's face first. I handed the folder to him. He opened it, eyebrows pulling together, read the first few lines, then looked at me alarmed. "Grandma, what is this?" "My plan," I said simply. "This is everything. The house, the cabin, even the savings accounts." "Yes, but why me?" His voice cracked. "Why not Mom or Uncle Peter?" I could have said many things. I could have talked about their absence, their cruelty, their parties and excuses, but I chose a different truth. Because you're the only one who came back without being called. He stared at the papers, then set them down gently like he was afraid to break something. "I don't know what to say," he whispered. "You don't have to say anything. Just remember who you are and remember what love looks like when it's real." His eyes were wet now. He wiped them with his sleeve like he used to when he was a boy and didn't want anyone to see him crying. We sat there for a long time, not speaking, just being. The way George and I used to sit in the evenings, two people who didn't need to fill the air with sound to feel close. As he was leaving, Ethan turned to me at the door. "If I come over next weekend, could we make pancakes again?" I smiled, full and soft, for the first time in days. "We'll even use the good syrup." Celia showed up the next morning. I knew she would not, because she missed me, not because she needed comfort, but because I'd stopped answering her texts. She arrived without warning, the tires of her black SUV crunching the gravel too fast, like she was late for something more important. She didn't knock, just walked in like she always used to, like the house still belonged to her in some invisible way. "Mom," she said, dropping her oversized purse on the hall table. "I've been trying to reach you." I didn't get up. I was folding laundry slowly, deliberately, matching socks like it was the most important job in the world. "I've been busy," I said. She scoffed lightly. "Busy with what?" I didn't answer. She walked into the kitchen, poured herself a glass of water without asking, and leaned against the counter like she owned the walls. "So," she said, "is it true?" I looked at her. "What are you talking about?" She tapped her nails against the glass. "Ethan said, you're changing your will." I finished folding a shirt and placed it neatly in the basket. "I am. To exclude Peter and me." "Yes." Celia laughed short, bitter. "Are you serious? After everything we've done for you?" "Everything you've done?" I looked up at her now, folding done, hands still. "You didn't come to your father's funeral, Celia. You didn't send flowers. You didn't call. You didn't even ask." "I had an appointment." "Yes." I cut her off. "Your nails. And then brunch." I saw the photos. She blinked, but didn't deny it. "You want to talk about what you've done for me?" I continued. "You sent me grocery lists, bills, school payments, mortgage requests, and I paid them quietly without asking for anything." "That's what family does," she snapped. "Helps each other." "No," I said softly. "That's what mothers do, and I did for years." She fell silent. "Your father built this home with his bare hands. He didn't have much, but he had pride. He taught you that respect is measured in actions, not words. And you couldn't give him 2 hours for a goodbye." "That's not fair," she said quietly. "Isn't it?" She stared at the floor. "So you're really cutting us out, just like that?" "No," I said. "Not just like that. I spent the last 20 years giving without getting. I buried my husband alone. I sat by his grave and waited for my children. They never came." "That's not just like that. That's a lifetime." She folded her arms, trying to look composed, but her mouth was tight. "You're punishing us." "No, Celia. I'm freeing myself and giving everything to Ethan." I said nothing. She laughed again, this time higher pitched. "He's a kid. What does he know about responsibility? He knows how to show up." The silence that followed was thick. I thought she might cry. I thought she might yell. Instead, she picked up her purse. "Well," she said, adjusting her sunglasses, "I hope this makes you feel powerful. No, I said calmly. It makes me feel peaceful. She left without another word. I waited until I heard the car pull away before I picked up the trust papers from the dining table and set them beside the folded laundry. Later that evening, I found a letter on the doorstep. No stamp, no envelope, just paper creased and smudged. You don't understand what it's like to balance everything. We tried our best. Maybe we failed, but cutting us out like this isn't the answer. I read it twice, then folded it in half and placed it in the drawer marked miscellaneous because that's what it was now. Just another piece of paper. Too little, too late. Peter came the day after. He didn't barge in like Celia. He knocked twice, waited, then knocked again. I opened the door slowly, already knowing he wouldn't come alone, and he didn't. Behind him stood Meredith, his wife, wearing her usual stiff smile and a scarf too expensive for the weather. She nodded at me like I was a stranger she'd agreed to meet as a favor. "Mom," Peter said, his voice calm, rehearsed. "Can we come in?" I stepped aside. He looked around the house like someone walking through a museum of a life they no longer recognized. I led them to the sitting room. They didn't take off their coats. "I heard from Celia," he began, "and from Ethan. I imagine you did." He cleared his throat. "I think there's been some confusion." I said nothing. Meredith crossed her legs delicately, the diamonds on her finger catching the afternoon light. "We understand this is a difficult time, May. Emotions run high after a loss." I looked at her. "You didn't come to his funeral either," she blinked. "I had a client dinner, very important deal, international." Peter shifted. "Mom, listen, I should have called. I should have come, but I didn't know how to. I thought maybe." "No," I interrupted. "You thought maybe if you ignored it long enough, it would become someone else's grief." He looked away. "I waited," I continued. "I sat in a room built by your father's hands alone while they lowered him into the ground, and not one of you showed up." Peter opened his mouth, but Meredith put a hand on his knee, a signal. "Let her speak." "We understand you're upset," she said, "and it's your right to change your will. But let's be reasonable. Ethan is a child. He's 19. Yes, but he's not experienced. He doesn't know how to handle a trust or manage property. He could be manipulated." I raised an eyebrow. "By whom?" Meredith didn't flinch. "By people who know he's inherited something valuable." "Like you?" I thought. Peter tried again. "Mom, I know I've disappointed you. I know I haven't been the best son, but you have to admit this is a bit extreme." "No," I said softly. "What's extreme is abandoning your father. What's extreme is living your life like the people who raised you are disposable." He swallowed hard. "So that's it. You're just cutting us off. You cut yourselves off." "I'm just admitting the truth." Meredith stood. "This could get complicated, May. Legally." I met her gaze. "It won't. The paperwork's clean. My lawyer's good. And I've had time to think." Peter looked older than I remembered, thinner at the temples, eyes hollow. "I thought you forgave people." "I do," I said. "But forgiveness doesn't mean access." They didn't argue after that. They stood, thanked me with forced politeness, and left. Only after the door closed did I feel the shake in my hands. Not fear, not doubt. Release. I sat by the window for a long time, watching the last light bleed out of the sky. The roses were almost bare now. Winter was close. George would have said, "They'll bloom again." And they would, but not for everyone. The bank smelled like lemon cleaner and quiet power, the kind of place where old money moved slowly and nobody raised their voice. I hadn't been inside in almost a year, but they remembered me. "Mrs. Holloway," the receptionist said, standing immediately. "Mr. Jansen will be right with you." I nodded politely and waited by the tall windows overlooking Main Street. Outside, people moved through their errands, heads down, busy. Inside, the world felt still like something important was always about to happen. "Mr. Jansen Richard came out a minute later, sharp as ever in his tailored suit. He looked like someone who'd never spilled coffee in his life. "May," he greeted warmly, shaking my hand. "I was surprised by your message." "Good," I said. "Surprise is good." He smiled, unsure, and led me to his office. Glass walls, a walnut desk, a single framed photo of his dog. George would have liked that, one honest face in a room full of finance. "I understand you want to make some changes," he said, opening my account file. "I already made them," I replied. "I'm here to make sure they're carried through without delay." He looked over the notes, eyebrows lifting as he read. "You've removed all link transfers, taken Peter and Celia off as beneficiaries, set up an irrevocable trust in Ethan's name." "That's a big shift." "I'm a big woman," I said. He chuckled. "Yes, you are." I leaned forward slightly. "I want safeguards, Richard. Ironclad, no appeals, no family members twisting his arm 5 years from now when they realize what they lost. We can structure the trust to prevent that. The payments will be controlled, only for school, housing, or health care, until he's 30. After that, full access, but still protected. Would you like a co-trustee?" "No," I said. "Ethan can have a financial advisor if he wants one, but the decisions are his. I trust him more than I trust lawyers." That wasn't an insult to Richard, just a truth. He adjusted his glasses. "You understand this can't be undone easily." "I don't want it undone." We went through everything. Signatures, dates, final confirmations. It felt like building something. Not a house, not a business, something quieter, stronger, a boundary that wouldn't bend with guilt or grow soft with time. Before I left, Richard folded his hands on the desk. "May, if I may ask, and you can absolutely tell me it's none of my business, but are you doing this out of anger?" I considered the question. "No," I said. "I'm doing it out of clarity." He nodded slowly. "That's rare." "No," I said again, more gently this time. "It's just late." When I stepped out into the afternoon light, it felt different, cleaner, somehow, lighter. Across the street was a coffee shop George and I used to visit after errands. I hadn't been there in years. The place had changed younger staff, louder music, but I walked in anyway and ordered a cappuccino. I sat near the window, watching the street. A woman in her 30s walked by, pushing a stroller, her coat flapping open in the wind. She looked tired, determined, familiar. I sipped my coffee slowly. No phone in my hand. No rush, just a cup, a chair, a full hour that belonged to no one but me. They always said this stage of life would be quiet. They didn't say how loud the peace could feel. Lorraine Campbell lived 2 houses down and had done so since 1972. She and I weren't the type of women who called each other best friends, but we'd shared enough cups of tea and traded enough knowing looks over our fences that the silence between us had become its own language. She knocked around 5, carrying a tin of lemon cookies and her usual gentle nosiness. "I saw Peter's car here yesterday," she said as soon as I opened the door. "Did he bring flowers or just excuses?" "Neither," I said, stepping aside to let her in. "He brought his wife and a suit." "Oh," she said, and that one word was soaked in judgment. We sat in the living room, and I poured her tea chamomile for her, strong black for me. She placed the tin between us on the coffee table and didn't open it yet. She waited. "I told them," I said, "everything. That they're out of the will, that Ethan is the only one who ever came back without being asked." Lorraine let out a long breath. "About damn time." I looked at her. "I'm sorry, May," she said, softening. "But I've watched you chase their approval for years. Babysitting when you had your own doctor's appointments, writing checks while they took cruises, smiling when they forgot birthdays. I kept thinking, she'll snap one day. And thank God you finally did." "I didn't snap," I said. "I peeled back everything that wasn't love." Lorraine smiled, better phrased. We sat in silence for a moment, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional gust outside. Fall was starting to settle, in the kind of fall that smelled like old leaves and the edge of something ending. "Do you regret it?" she asked eventually. I shook my head. "I regret not doing it sooner." She opened the tin finally. The cookies were perfect, crisp edges, dusted with sugar, buttery and soft in the middle. We each took one and chewed thoughtfully. "You know," she said, "my niece tried to get me to sell this house last spring. Said it was too much for me. That I should move to one of those senior communities near the lake." "Everything's done for you, Auntie," she said. "Laundry, meals, even group outings. And what did you say?" I said I'd rather die in a house full of chipped mugs and my own silence than live in a place that smelled like bleach and other people's boredom. I laughed a small, real laugh that came up from somewhere steady. Lorraine leaned in. "You and we come from a generation that knows what endurance costs. We wore our spines down, raising people who think love is measured in gifts and gratitude is optional." I nodded. "You're not cruel, May," she added. "They'll say you are. They'll whisper about how she cut off her own children. But what they won't say is that you were also the one who kept them afloat through every storm, even when they didn't bother to ask if you were drowning." I blinked hard, but nothing fell. We talked for another hour about her garden, the state of the neighborhood, the squirrels chewing on her gutter again. When she left, I hugged her longer than usual. That night, I didn't turn on the television. I pulled out an old letter George had written to me during his first business trip, tucked into a drawer I hadn't opened in years. "May, this house is never empty with you in it. You are the roof, the floorboards, and the lock on the door. Even when it feels like no one sees you, I do." I read it 3 times before sliding it back into the envelope. The house was quiet but not empty. Not anymore. It started with a walk, a simple, unremarkable act. But for me, it was the first one taken without a reason, tied to someone else. Not to pick up prescriptions, not to drop off a casserole, not to return a dish I didn't ask to borrow. I just wanted to walk. The morning was crisp, not cold, the kind of air that sharpened your lungs but didn't bite your skin. I wore George's old windbreaker, a size too big, frayed at the cuffs, and felt oddly comforted by its weight. I walked the neighborhood slowly, not like someone exercising, but like someone remembering what still belongs to her. The Mapletons' house still had the same blue shutters. The Wilsons' porch swing creaked the same way it did when George used to say, "We should fix ours before that one finally falls." He never did. Neither did they. At the park, I sat on a bench under the old elm tree, the one that had split in a storm back in '99. It still leaned slightly, stubborn and alive. Across the path, 2 young mothers pushed strollers, chatting about sleep training and preschools. They didn't glance at me, and I didn't mind. I wasn't part of their world anymore. I didn't want to be. A woman sat down on the other end of my bench, maybe in her 40s. She had that tired but functioning look I remembered from my own middle years. The kind of woman who makes 5 lists a day but forgets what she walked into the room for. We sat in silence for a few minutes. Then she said, not looking at me, "You come here often?" "Used to," I said. "Before people stopped needing rides and casseroles." She laughed softly. "That sounds nice. We didn't exchange names. We didn't need to. I'm here to clear my head," she said. "My daughter told me yesterday that she doesn't think she wants kids. Said she's not sure she sees the point." I raised my eyebrows. "What did you say?" I told her I didn't see the point of her 5 tattoos, but I managed to keep that to myself. I smiled. "You didn't keep it to yourself, though, did you?" She laughed again, more freely this time. "No, I didn't. We talked for 15 minutes about nothing important and everything that mattered. She left first, waving a little. I watched her disappear around the curve of the trail, and I felt something strange in my chest, a small opening, like the cracking of a long, frozen door. That night, I made dinner just for myself. Not quick food, not leftovers, a full meal. I set the table, used the good dishes, lit a candle. I played the radio softly in the background, the same station George liked. Even if they talked more than they played music now, and I ate in silence. Not lonely, but alone. There's a difference. Afterward, I walked into the den and looked around. The room had always been George's space papers, books, half-finished crossword puzzles. I hadn't touched much since he passed, but tonight I did. I dusted, opened the windows, aired it out. Then I sat at his desk and wrote a letter to myself, just a few lines. You are not invisible. You are not a burden. You are not required to earn peace through exhaustion. I folded the paper and tucked it into the drawer beside his last crossword, half done. The clue for 14 down, still blank. The hint was end of one chapter, start of another. I didn't need to know the answer. I was already living it. The envelope had his handwriting. I recognized it instantly, slightly tilted. Careful block letters with uneven spacing. Ethan had always pressed too hard with his pen, like the words wouldn't count unless they left a mark. It arrived 3 days after our conversation, tucked between a credit card offer and a grocery flyer. I brought it inside, set it on the kitchen counter, and stared at it while my kettle boiled. I didn't open it right away. I let it sit there the way I used to let my birthday cards sit unopened on the mantel until after dinner, prolonging the mystery. When the tea was ready, I sat down and opened the envelope. Dear Grandma, I wanted to write this instead of texting. I know I could have just said it last time I saw you, but I was still trying to find the right words. And now, after thinking about it for a few days, I don't think there are perfect words. So, here are the honest ones. Thank you. Not just for the trust, or the house, or the cabin, though I know what a huge thing that is, but for something else. For being the one person in this family who never asked me to be anything but exactly who I am. You've always made space for me. Even when my parents were pushing me to be more polished, more ambitious, more, I don't know, strategic. You were never strategic. You were just real. I didn't know Grandpa was sick. I didn't know he died. I still don't really know how to process that. And I'm sorry. I would have been there. You know I would have. And I'm so angry at Mom for not telling me, for assuming it didn't matter. I don't know what made you choose me, but I promise I won't waste it. I'm not going to let you down. I want to take care of this house, Grandma. I want to learn what you and Grandpa built. I want to understand the kind of strength it takes to keep showing up when no one else does. I love you. I don't say that enough, but I do. I always have. I read it 3 times. Once with my eyes dry, once with my hand on my chest, once with tears sliding quietly down my face. Then I set the letter on the mantel and stood in front of it like it was something sacred. Because in this house, letters like that were rare, not because love didn't exist, but because it had gone too long, unspoken, assumed, stretched thin. I didn't need the money I'd set aside, not anymore, but I needed this. I needed to know that something I'd done, some small, quiet investment of time and tenderness, had not been swallowed whole by ungrateful children and fake holidays. That night, I sat in George's chair and watched the shadows move across the floor as the sun dipped behind the maple trees. Ethan was the kind of man George would have respected. Not loud, not pushy, but steady, curious, present. That last one mattered more than anything now. Being present, not just showing up, but seeing. I knew he wouldn't waste the trust. Not because of the money, but because he'd tasted what it meant to be forgotten. And people like that don't let things rot in silence. He'd plant something with it. He'd remember. I closed my eyes and listened to the soft creak of the house as the temperature dropped. Wood shifting, settling, breathing. It was a sound I'd once found lonely. Now it sounded like life continuing, like legacy whispering back. Evenings had a new rhythm now. No phone calls from Celia asking if I could just stop by the school to pick up Ethan, not because she needed me, but because her yoga class ran late. No texts from Peter wondering if I'd mind covering a surprise car repair, never urgent enough to justify the panic, but always just enough to apply pressure. The silence had become gentle. That evening, I set the table for one. Not because I was lonely, but because I finally understood the difference between eating and being fed. I made roast chicken real roast, not frozen, not microwaved. Potatoes, too. I used rosemary from the garden George had planted back when we still believed weekends were for laughter and not errands. I lit a candle. I didn't need it, but I wanted it. Halfway through dinner, the house was so quiet I could hear the ticking of the clock in the hallway. I remembered that clock from the first apartment George and I ever rented, how loud it had sounded when we lay awake at night with no money, no insurance, no real plan except each other. He always said, "We'll build something, even if it's slow." It was slow, and it was beautiful. After dinner, I washed the dishes slowly, not rushed, not multitasking, not thinking about whether someone else would need the kitchen next. I dried them, put them away, and then I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I danced. Not well, not long, but enough. I turned on the record player, the old one George had tried to fix 100 times until he gave up and told me, "It's got more charm broken." I put on a record from when we were young. The music crackled and popped, but it still played, and I swayed in the kitchen, arms loose, eyes closed, feeling like myself again for the first time in years. When the song ended, I stood there catching my breath. The kitchen looked the same. The dishes were clean, the floor was swept, but something had changed. I had changed, and it felt good. The next morning, I woke up early. The sun was just starting to come up, painting the sky pink and orange. I made coffee, sat on the back porch, and watched the birds. A robin landed on the fence. It hopped twice, looked at me, then flew away. I used to think moments like this were boring. Now I knew they were everything. That week, I started doing things I'd put off for years. I joined a book club at the library, not because anyone asked me to, but because I wanted to. I signed up for a pottery class at the community center. My hands shook the first time I touched the clay, but the teacher was kind. She said, "Don't worry about making it perfect, just make it yours." I liked that. I also started walking every morning. Not for exercise, though that was nice too, but for the quiet, for the air, for the feeling of moving forward, one step at a time. One day, I ran into an old neighbor, Betty, at the grocery store. She looked surprised to see me. "May, I haven't seen you in forever. How are you holding up?" I smiled. "I'm doing well, actually." She tilted her head. "Really? After everything?" "Really," I said, and I meant it. Betty studied my face like she was looking for cracks, but she wouldn't find any. Not anymore. "You look different," she said finally. "Lighter somehow." "I am," I told her. And we talked for a few minutes before going our separate ways. As I walked to my car, I realized she was right. I did feel lighter, like I'd been carrying a heavy backpack for years and finally put it down. That weekend, Ethan came over like he'd promised. He brought pancake mix and fresh blueberries. We cooked together in the kitchen, laughing when the first pancake came out burnt. "Grandma, I think we need more butter," he said, scraping the pan. "Or less heat," I suggested. We tried again. This time, they turned out perfect golden and fluffy, with the blueberries bursting sweet in every bite. We sat at the table eating slowly, talking about everything and nothing. He told me about school, about the classes he liked and the ones he didn't. He asked me about Grandpa, about what he was like when he was young. I told him stories I hadn't thought about in years, about how George used to sing off-key in the shower, about how he'd leave me little notes hidden around the house, about how he'd hold my hand even when we were old and gray. Ethan listened carefully, really listened, the way young people rarely do anymore. When we finished eating, he helped me wash the dishes. As we stood side by side at the sink, he said quietly, "Thank you for trusting me, Grandma." I looked at him. "Thank you for being trustworthy." He smiled, and I saw George in that smile, the kindness, the steadiness, the quiet strength. After he left, I sat in the living room and looked around. The house felt full again, not with people or noise, but with purpose, with possibility, with peace. I thought about Peter and Celia. Part of me wondered if they'd ever understand, if they'd ever look back and realize what they'd lost. But mostly, I didn't think about them at all anymore, because thinking about them meant living in the past, and I was done with the past. I was ready for whatever came next. That night, I pulled out an old journal I'd kept years ago. The pages were yellowed, the ink faded. I flipped through it, reading entries from when the kids were small. Peter took his first steps today, George cried. Celia sang her first song in the school play. She was nervous, but she did great. Family picnic at the lake. Everyone laughed so much. I read them all, and I felt sad. Not for me, but for them, because they'd forgotten how to be a family. And I couldn't teach them that anymore. I closed the journal and put it back in the drawer. Then I opened a new notebook, blank pages, fresh start. On the first page, I wrote, "This is my story now, not theirs. Mine," and I meant it. The weeks passed quietly. Fall turned deeper, the leaves falling faster now, covering the yard in gold and red. I raked them into piles, not because I had to, but because I liked the rhythm of it, the scrape of the rake, the rustle of the leaves, the cool air on my face. Lorraine came by one afternoon with cider and cookies. We sat on the porch, wrapped in blankets, watching the world go by. "You seem happy," she said. "I am," I replied. "Good," she said, patting my hand. "You deserve it." And maybe I did. Maybe I'd earned this peace, not through suffering, but through choosing myself, through finally understanding that love doesn't mean losing yourself. It means finding yourself and holding on. One evening, I was reading in the living room when the phone rang. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to pick up. "Hello? Mrs. Holloway?" It was Thomas, my lawyer. "Hi, Thomas. I just wanted to let you know the trust is fully executed. Everything's filed, everything's legal. Ethan is officially the sole beneficiary." I took a breath. "Thank you. Are you sure about this?" he asked gently. "I'm sure." "Okay then. I'll send you copies of everything for your records." After we hung up, I sat there for a moment. It was done, truly done, and I felt nothing. No regret, no doubt, no second guessing. Just certainty. That night, I dreamed of George. We were young again, standing in the kitchen of our first apartment. He was holding me, swaying to music only we could hear. "You did good, May," he whispered. "You did real good." I woke up with tears on my cheeks, but I was smiling, because I knew he was right. I had done good. I'd protected what mattered. I'd honored what was real, and I'd let go of what wasn't. The next morning, I walked out to the garden. The roses were almost completely bare now, just a few stubborn leaves clinging to the branches. But underneath, I could see tiny green buds starting to form. New growth, new life. I knelt down and touched the soil, feeling its coldness, its richness. This garden had survived drought, frost, neglect, and grief, and it was still here, still ready to bloom again when the time was right. Just like me. I stood up, brushed the dirt from my knees, and looked around. The sun was bright. The air was crisp. The world was still turning, and I was still here. Not just surviving, but living. Really living. For the first time in years, I felt excited about tomorrow, about next week, about next year, because those days were mine now, no one else's, just mine. And I would fill them however I chose. That afternoon, I made a list, not of chores or errands, but of dreams, things I'd always wanted to do but never had time for. Learn to paint, visit the ocean, read all the books on my shelf, plant a vegetable garden in the spring, take that pottery class seriously, maybe even travel. I looked at the list and smiled. It wasn't long, but it was mine. And that made it perfect. As the sun began to set, I poured myself a cup of tea and sat by the window. The sky turned purple, then pink, then dark. Stars started to appear, one by one, tiny pinpricks of light in the endless black. I thought about George, about how he used to say, "We're all just stars, May, shining as bright as we can until we can't anymore." He'd been my brightest star, and now he was gone. But I was still shining. Maybe not as bright as I used to, maybe softer now, steadier, but still here, still glowing. And that was enough. The house creaked around me, settling into the night. I finished my tea, rinsed the cup, and turned off the lights. As I walked to my bedroom, I passed the mantel where Ethan's letter still sat. I touched it lightly, a reminder of what love really looks like. In my room, I changed into my pajamas and climbed into bed. The sheets were cool and clean, the pillow was soft, and for the first time in months, I felt completely at peace. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. Tomorrow would come, and I would be ready for it, because I wasn't waiting anymore. I wasn't hoping anymore. I wasn't wishing for my children to change or my life to go back to how it was. I was moving forward, into something new, something better, something mine. And as I drifted off to sleep, I thought about all the years ahead, the quiet mornings, the small joys, the unexpected adventures, the moments of grace. They were all waiting for me, and I couldn't wait to meet them. Because this wasn't the end of my story, it was just the beginning of a new chapter, one where I wasn't defined by who left me, but by who I chose to become. And that person? She was stronger than she ever knew, braver than she ever imagined, and finally free. Thanks for listening to my story, and if it moved you an inch, please take a moment to write me under the comments. Tell me where you are watching from. Click on the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss out on any of our stories.